While other butchers stood knee-deep in blood, Martin Latsis slaughtered thousands with hands that remained terrifyingly clean, stained only by ink. He was the architect of a new kind of cruelty, the man who famously declared, "Do not look for evidence to see what the accused has done. Ask instead to which class he belongs. That answer alone determines his fate." To Latsis, these were not human beings. They were merely statistical errors, waiting to be deleted from the spreadsheet of history. But this cold bureaucracy was not born in a vacuum. It was a desperate response to a world on fire. The air in Moscow and Petrograd in the autumn of 1918 tastes of ash and damp wool. The Bolshevik regime, barely a year old, is a wounded animal, cornered and vicious. The white armies are pressing from the borders. Foreign interventionists are landing in the ports, and the economy has collapsed into a barter system of stolen goods and starvation rations. But the greatest threat, according to the men in the leather coats, is internal. It is the phantom enemy, the neighbor, the man who wears spectacles, the woman who speaks French. Fear has become the only currency that retains its value. It hangs in the stairwells of the apartment blocks where the Cheka raiding parties hammer on doors at 3 a.m. It settles in the queues for bread, where a careless word can lead to a cellar execution. And sitting at the apex of this pyramid of anxiety was the man with the ink-stained fingers, himself. He was a man of quiet demeanor, scholarly glasses, and a heart that is turned into a block of ideological ice. He is the deputy of the Cheka, the right hand of Iron Felix Dzerzhinsky, while Dzerzhinsky is the ascetic monk of the terror. The face of its fanatical devotion, Latsis is its operating system. He provides the intellectual framework that allows ordinary men to become mass murderers without losing sleep. He tells them that murder is not murder when it is historical necessity. He absolves them of the sin of Cain by telling them they are not killing a brother, but removing a tumor. This moral inversion is the true horror of the Red Terror. It is easy to be outraged by a thug with a club. It is much harder and far more terrifying to comprehend a bureaucrat who organizes genocide with the same emotional detachment as a clerk filing tax returns. Latsis brings the Industrial Revolution to the hangman's noose. The genesis of this nightmare lies in the chaotic summer of that year. The Bolsheviks are holding on to power by their fingernails. On August 30th, a day of double catastrophe, the trigger is pulled. In Petrograd, Moisey Uritsky, the local Cheka boss, is gunned down in the lobby of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Hours later in Moscow at the Michelson factory, a nearsighted socialist revolutionary named Fanny Kaplan fires 3 shots at Vladimir Lenin. One bullet pierces his neck, another his shoulder. The leader of the revolution falls gasping on the pavement. The reaction is instantaneous and volcanic. The Bolsheviks do not seek the specific conspirators. They seek vengeance against a demographic. The Pravda newspaper screams, "For the blood of Lenin, let there be floods of blood of the bourgeoisie, more blood, as much as possible." Martin Latsis steps into this void of rage with a plan. He understands that anger burns out, but a system endures. He takes the raw, hot fury of the assassination attempts and cools it into a rigid, icy methodology. The Red Terror is officially proclaimed on September 2nd, but it is Latsis who gives it shape. He transforms the Cheka from a frantic security force into a state within a state, answerable to no one, restrained by no law. The mandate is absolute. There are no trials, no defense attorneys, no appeals. There is only the Troika, a tribunal of 3 Chekists, and the basement. The sound of a truck engine revving becomes the lullaby of the cities. a mechanical roar designed to drown out the singular crack of the Mauser C-96 pistol. The victims of Latsis's philosophy are dragged from their beds not because they have planted bombs or smuggled weapons. They are taken because their hands are too smooth. This becomes the literal litmus test of survival. Checkpoints are established on the bridges and railway stations. Latsis's men, often young, illiterate sailors or peasants emboldened by the sudden rush of absolute power, stop travelers and demand to see their palms. Calluses mean you are a worker, a friend, a human being. Smooth skin means you are a parasite, a bourgeois, a target. It is a grotesque simplification of sociology turned into a lottery of life and death. A pianist's hands are smooth, therefore he is an enemy. A surgeon's hands are soft, therefore he must die. The intellect, the skill, the culture of a nation is being filtered through a sieve of primitive class hatred, and Martin Latsis holds the handle. We see the paradox in the man himself. Born Janis Sudrabs in a peasant family in Latvia, he knows the sting of poverty. He has the credentials of the oppressed. He is a writer, a poet of sorts, a man who once dreamed of lifting the yoke from the neck of the common man. Yet he constructs a slaughterhouse that consumes the very people he claims to liberate. He justifies the execution of hostages, men and women seized solely to be shot if the enemy advances, as a necessary cruelty. He writes in his reports about the hygienic efficiency of the terror. There is a deep, profound disconnect between the reality of the blood-slicked floors of the Lubyanka and the sterile academic language Latsis uses to describe it. He treats the population of Russia as a spreadsheet. Rows are deleted, columns are adjusted. The human suffering is merely a rounding error in the calculation of the future utopia. The silence that descends over the intelligentsia is heavy and suffocating. People stop keeping diaries. They burn letters. They learn to speak in whispers, or better yet, not to speak at all. The terror that Latsis engineers is not just about killing bodies. It is about killing trust. When the standard for execution is class origin, anyone can be denounced. A disgruntled servant, a jealous neighbor, a rejected lover, all they need to do is whisper the word bourgeois to a passing patrol, and the machine that Latsis built grinds into motion. He has weaponized envy. He has democratized the power of life and death, handing it to the mob while he sits in his office adjusting his spectacles, reading the tallies of the night's work like a stock market report. This bureaucratic approach creates a distance that shields the perpetrators from the horror of their actions. Latsis insists on paperwork. Every execution must be logged. Every confiscation must be recorded. This veneer of legality makes the atrocities palatable to the men pulling the triggers. They are not murderers. They are functionaries. They are following Order Number 10. They are implementing the directive on the Red Terror. Latsis provides them with the psychological armor of duty. He tells them that pity is a bourgeois weakness, that mercy is treason. To hesitate before shooting a weeping woman is to betray the revolution. He hardens the hearts of thousands of young men, turning them into the iron ones, who can look at a pile of corpses and see only a completed task. The sheer scale of the operation requires a vast infrastructure. Under Latsis and Dzerzhinsky, the Cheka expands exponentially. It takes over hotels, insurance buildings, and private mansions. The luxury of the old world becomes the dungeon of the new. The parquet floors where aristocrats once danced are now stained with dark, sticky fluids. The wine cellars are converted into holding cells where prisoners are packed so tightly they can only stand, suffocating in the fetid air, waiting for the call of their names. Latsis walks these corridors. He inspects the work. He does not recoil. To him, the smell of unwashed bodies and fear is the scent of progress. He believes with a terrifying sincerity that he is burning down the old house to build a palace. And if the occupants are burned alive inside, it is the fault of history, not his own. But there is a shadow hanging over Martin Latsis, a shadow he casts but cannot see. He is creating a precedent by establishing the rule that evidence is unnecessary, that a man can be killed for who he is rather than what he does. He is forging a weapon that has no hilt. It is a blade that cuts the hand of the wielder. He is a loyal Bolshevik today, a hero of the Cheka, the scourge of the bourgeoisie. But the definition of enemy is fluid. The dial he has set to class enemy can be turned by another hand to spy, traitor, or wrecker. He is building the cage that will eventually hold him. He is sharpening the axe that will one day sever his own neck. The tragedy of Martin Latsis is that he believes he is the surgeon, when in reality, he is just the next patient on the waiting list. The terror spreads outward from the capitals like an ink stain on a map. Latsis sends telegrams to provincial Chekas demanding increased quotas. You are too soft, he chides them. You are sleeping. He demands energy. He demands results. In the provinces where oversight is non-existent, the terror morphs into sadistic madness. Local warlords, operating under the banner of the Cheka, inflict tortures that would shame the Inquisition. They freeze men into statues of ice. They scalp their victims. Latsis receives the reports. He does not stop it. He urges them on. For him, the only error is inaction. The only crime is hesitation. He creates an environment where brutality is the quickest path to promotion. The most ruthless rise to the top, forming a new elite of violence that will dominate the Soviet Union for decades. As 1918 bleeds into 1919, the piles of bodies grow higher. The Red Terror is no longer a temporary measure. It is the foundation of the state. Latsis has succeeded. He has instilled a fear so deep that it penetrates the bone. He has silenced the opposition not by debate, but by annihilation. But in the silence of his office, amidst the stacks of death warrants, there is a paradoxical emptiness. He is destroying the very society he aimed to improve. He is killing the engineers who could rebuild the bridges, the doctors who could heal the wounded, the teachers who could educate the illiterate. He is hollowing out the nation in the name of saving it. This is the man who stands before us in the twilight of the Russian Empire. Not a monster with claws, but a man with a pen. A man who looks at a human being and sees a category. A man who believes that the road to paradise must be paved with skulls. Martin Latsis, the accountant of the apocalypse, has opened the ledger. The ink is blood and the pages are endless. The machine is running and it is hungry. And as the winter sets in, the darkness of the long polar night is matched only by the darkness in the hearts of those who follow his commands. The terror has arrived, and it wears a leather coat and speaks in the language of administrative necessity. To understand the architect, one must inspect the foundation, and the foundation of Martin Latsis is built on the frozen, blood-soaked soil of the Courland Governorate. He was not born a monster in a leather coat. He was born Janus Sudrabs, a peasant boy with dirt under his fingernails and the vast melancholy horizon of the Baltic countryside in his eyes. In the damp chill of the Petrograd autumn of 1918, as he signs execution orders with the rhythmic scratch of a steel nib, his mind is a vault of cold determination that was locked 13 years prior. The man sitting at the desk, illuminated by the harsh glare of an electric bulb, is a creature forged in the fires of the 1905 revolution. That failed uprising was the crucible that burned away the soft tissue of Janus Sudrab's soul and left behind the hardened skeleton of Martin Latsis. He remembers the punitive expeditions of the Tsar, the Cossacks riding through the Latvian villages, the whips, the burnings, the casual brutality of the aristocracy against the peasantry. It was there, amidst the smoking ruins of his neighbors' farmhouses, that he learned his first and most enduring lesson. Mercy is a luxury of the victor, and he intends never to be the vanquished again. This trauma is not a dormant memory. It is the fuel that powers his engine. In 1918, Latsis is 30 years old, but his eyes carry the weariness of a man who has seen centuries of oppression. He has shed his peasant identity and adopted the pseudonym Latsis, derived from the Latvian word for bear. Yet there is nothing ursine or clumsy about him. He is sharp, angular, and intellectual. He is a paradox, a poet who writes verses about the liberation of the human spirit, yet sanctions the liquidation of human bodies with the stroke of a pen. In the early months of the Bolshevik regime, while others are drunk on the chaos of anarchy, Latsis is obsessed with structure. He sees the Cheka not merely as a sword to strike the enemy, but as a scalpel to excise the infection. He gravitates toward Felix Dzerzhinsky, the ascetic Polish nobleman turned revolutionary fanatic, finding in him a kindred spirit of absolute, terrifying purity. Dzerzhinsky provides the spiritual fire. Latsis provides the bureaucratic architecture. They are the twin pillars of the terror, bound by a shared belief that the old world is so rotten that only a river of blood can wash it clean. The partnership between Latsis and Dzerzhinsky is cemented in the quarters of the Smolny Institute and later the Lubyanka. It is a relationship defined not by warmth, but by a shared icy efficiency. Latsis becomes the Iron Felix's favorite theoretician because he can articulate what Dzerzhinsky feels. When Dzerzhinsky speaks of the sword of the revolution, Latsis drafts the organizational chart that decides who holds the sword and who falls beneath it. He is the one who translates the fiery rhetoric of class warfare into the dull administrative reality of quotas and forms. He is the deputy who stands in the shadow, whispering the logic of extermination. While Dzerzhinsky might be the face of the terror, staring out from posters with burning eyes, Latsis is the mind that categorizes the victims. He brings a terrifying calmness to the proceedings. He does not shout. He does not rage. He explains in quiet, measured tones why it is necessary to kill 1,000 to save 1,000,000. This detachment makes him far more dangerous than the sadists who enjoy the wet work in the basements. A sadist can be satiated. A bureaucrat with a quota is relentless. The headquarters of the Petrograd Cheka, located at Gorokovaya Street No. 2, becomes the laboratory for Latsis's social experiments. The building itself, formerly the majestic residence of the prefect of police, has been transformed into a hive of paranoia. The grand staircase, once ascended by heavy boots of czarist gendarmes, now echoes with the hurried footsteps of leather-clad Chekists and the shuffling drag of prisoners. The air inside is thick with the smell of stale tobacco, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of fear. It is here, in the autumn of 1918, that Latsis refines his methodology. He is not interested in individual guilt. That is a bourgeois concept. He is interested in class hygiene. The interrogation rooms are not courts of law. They are processing centers. The goal is not truth. The goal is classification. Latsis moves through these rooms like a hospital administrator, inspecting the wards, checking the efficiency of the staff, ensuring the turnover of patients is rapid and constant. It is in this atmosphere of industrial grimness that Latsis implements his most infamous directive, the inspection of hands. This is not a metaphor. It is a literal physical procedure that reduces the complexity of a human life to the texture of the epidermis. The set piece of this practice plays out daily in the reception hall of Gorokovaya II, a cavernous room stripped of its furniture, the windows painted over with black paint to keep out the prying eyes of the street. The scene is one of grotesque simplicity. A line of 30 prisoners stands shivering in the drafty hall, a cross-section of Petrograd society caught in the dragnet of a midnight raid. There is a professor of philology, still wearing his nightshirt tucked into trousers, a dock worker with soot in his hair, a nervous clerk clutching a hat, a woman in a silk dress that has seen better days. At the front of the line sits a Cheka officer behind a rough wooden table, a Nagant revolver acting as a paperweight. Latsis stands to the side, leaning against a pillar, arms crossed, observing the process with the critical eye of a foreman. He is not there to intervene. He is there to ensure the purity of the method. The officer does not ask for names. He does not ask for alibis. He barks a single command, hands on the table, palms up. The professor steps forward, his hands shaking. He places them on the wood. They are pale, the fingers long and slender, the skin soft from a lifetime of turning pages and holding chalk. The officer glances at them for a fraction of a second. Right, he grunts. The professor is shoved to the right side of the room, towards a door that leads to the holding cells and, eventually, the truck. The dock worker is next. He slams his hands down, defiant. They are broad, calloused, the knuckles scarred, the skin like rough leather. Left, says the officer. The dock worker is pushed to the left, towards freedom, or perhaps conscription into the Red Army. The clerk follows. His hands are stained with ink, but they are soft. He tries to explain that he is a worker, a servant of the state. The officer does not look at his face. He looks only at the palms. Right. The woman in silk hides her hands behind her back. When forced to show them, they are manicured, smooth as porcelain. Right. Latsis watches this binary sorting of souls without a flicker of emotion. To him, this is not cruelty, it is science. The hands do not lie. Words can be faked, documents can be forged, but the hands tell the history of a person's labor. Soft hands steal the value created by others. Rough hands create the value. It is a crude, brutal Marxist Darwinism, and Latsis is its high priest. He sees the weeping of the right group not as human suffering, but as the dying gasps of an obsolete species. He sees the confusion of the left group not as trauma, but as liberation. He nods to the officer, a silent affirmation of the procedure's efficiency. The line moves forward. A life is judged every 10 seconds. The sound of boots on the floorboards, the whimper of the condemned, the scratch of the pen on the list. It is the rhythm of the new order. Latsis adjusts his spectacles, satisfied. The machine is working. The alien elements are being filtered out with the precision of a threshing machine, separating wheat from chaff. This inspection of hands becomes a symbol of the arbitrary nature of the terror. It spreads from Gorokovaya to the checkpoints on the bridges, across the Neva, to the railway stations, to the roadblocks in the countryside. Young Chekists, barely literate, seize upon this simple heuristic. They stop travelers, demand to see their hands, and dispense judgment on the spot. A violinist is shot because his calluses are on his fingertips, not his palms. A seamstress is spared because her fingers are pricked and rough. It is a lottery of skin, sanctioned by the intellect of Martin Latsis. He has given the mob a license to kill based on anatomy. He has bypassed the need for investigation, for evidence, for thought. He has streamlined the path to the grave. But the formation of Latsis is not just about his relationship with the victims. It is about his relationship with his own identity. He is a Latvian in a Russian revolution. This is a critical nuance. The Latvians, specifically the Latvian riflemen, are the Praetorian Guard of the Bolsheviks. They are disciplined, loyal, and hated by the Russian populace who see them as foreign occupiers. Latsis is aware of this ethnic tension. He knows that to the Russian merchant or the Russian priest, he is an alien invader, a German or a Jew, in their prejudiced whispering, even though he is neither. This isolation fuels his ruthlessness. He has no organic connection to the Russian communities he is purging. He is not killing his own high school teacher or his own village priest. He is purging a foreign body. This psychological distance allows him to operate with a clinical detachment that a local Russian revolutionary might struggle to maintain. He is a surgeon operating on a stranger. His writings from this period reveal a man desperate to intellectualize his brutality. In the evenings, after the sorting at Gorokhovaya II is done, he retreats to his office to write articles for the Red Terror. He composes poetry that speaks of a sunlit future rising from the ashes of the old world. He is not a hypocrite in his own mind. He is a visionary who accepts the cost of the vision. He writes about the heavy burden of the Chekist, portraying the executioners as martyrs who must dirty their hands so that future generations can live in purity. It is a perverse form of self-pity. He views himself and his colleagues as the true victims, forced by history to perform these terrible necessary tasks. We are the cleaners, he tells a subordinate. The dirt does not like to be removed, but the room must be clean. The disconnect between his literary aspirations and his daily reality is jarring. He collects books. He appreciates art. Yet he orders the destruction of the very class that produces these things. He creates a binary world where culture is suspect if it is not proletarian. In his formative period as a Cheka leader, he begins to construct the language of the purge. He coins phrases, drafts memos, and creates the bureaucratic euphemisms that will cloak Soviet terror for decades. The highest measure of social defense, execution, isolation, imprisonment. He is building the dictionary of totalitarianism. As 1918 draws to a close, Latsis's reputation is solidified. He is the calculator of death. He is the man who can look at a pile of corpses and see only a completed quota. He has proven his loyalty to Lenin and Dzerzhinsky, not by shouting the loudest, but by killing the most efficiently. But the shadows in the corners of Gorokhovaya II are lengthening. The system he is building is hungry, and it is growing larger than its creator. The hand inspection is just the beginning. Soon he will be sent to Ukraine, where the theories he has tested in Petrograd will be applied on a scale that will make Gorokhovaya II look like a rehearsal. The formative period is over. The machine is built. Now it must be fed. Latsis walks out of the building into the biting cold of the Petrograd night. The city is dark, save for the few street lamps that cast long, distorted shadows on the snow. He pulls his leather coat tighter around him, the iconic armor of his caste. He does not look back at the basement windows, where the lights still burn. He gets into the waiting car, his mind already moving to the next task, the next list, the next class to be erased. He feels no guilt, only the weight of his own terrible logic. He is a man who has cut the brakes on the train of history, and he is convinced that the crash will be beautiful. The train that carries Martin Latsis south in January 1919 cuts through a landscape that has ceased to resemble a country and has become a graveyard of empires. He is leaving the frozen, starving order of Petrograd for the blood-soaked chaos of Ukraine, appointed to head the all-Ukrainian Cheka. The rails rattle beneath the wheels, a rhythmic percussion that matches the relentless ticking of his own mind. He brings with him not just trunks of files and a squad of leather-clad Praetorians, but a new operating system for the apocalypse. In Petrograd, he theorized the terror. In Ukraine, he will industrialize it. The mechanism he is about to install in Kiev is designed to strip the act of killing of its last vestiges of humanity, turning it into a process as banal and repetitive as stamping a passport. Kiev falls to the Bolsheviks in February, and Latsis establishes his headquarters in a requisitioned mansion in the Lipki district, the enclave of the sugar barons and aristocrats he despises. The geography of the terror shifts from the damp cellars of the north to the manicured gardens of the south. Here the escalation begins not with a bang, but with the clatter of typewriters. Latsis introduces the Ankita, a standardized questionnaire that becomes the most dangerous document in the Soviet territories. It is an innocent-looking form, printed on cheap gray paper demanding details that seem trivial. Education, foreign travel, languages spoken, property owned before 1914. But Latsis has calibrated the machine so that specific answers trigger automatic outcomes. A check mark in the box for university education is a red flag. A yes to relatives abroad is a condemnation. The Ankita branches the population into two streams, those useful to the state and those who are socially dangerous. The brilliance of the mechanism lies in its detachment. The clerk who hands out the form does not kill. The analyst who reads it does not kill. They merely process data. The system requires a division of responsibility so fragmented that guilt evaporates before it can settle on any single conscience. Latsis orchestrates this fragmentation with the skill of a conductor. In the frantic months of the spring of 1919, the Kiev Cheka operates like a factory running triple shifts. The arresting team brings the raw material, frightened men and women, to the gates. They hand them over to the internal guard, who log them into the basement cells. The investigators never see the cells. They sit in the high-ceiling drawing rooms upstairs, drinking tea and reviewing the anketas. They make marks in the margins with red pencil, Raskod, expenditure. This is the euphemism Latsis propagates, a bookkeeping term for execution. It creates a linguistic sanitary zone. One does not murder a father of three. One authorizes an expenditure. The file then moves to the commandant's platoon, the executioners who wait in the garage or the garden shed. They know nothing of the victim's crime or identity. They know only that the paperwork is in order. The basement of the Kiev Cheka, under Latsis' supervision, gains a reputation that whispers across Europe. It is known as the meat grinder. The sheer volume of expenditures creates a logistical nightmare that Latsis solves with characteristic ruthlessness. The ground in the garden becomes saturated. The neighbors complain of the smell. Latsis orders the use of quicklime and the digging of deeper trenches. He treats these gruesome realities as engineering problems. When the noise of the nightly executions disturbs the sleep of the surviving bourgeoisie in the surrounding villas, he orders the engines of heavy trucks to be revved during the operations. The roar of the internal combustion engine becomes the soundtrack of the Ukrainian night, a mechanical beast drowning out the human voice. This is the escalation of the mechanism. The technology of the 20th century mobilized to hide the barbarism of the Dark Ages. It is in the collegium meetings that the true horror of the bureaucratic method is revealed. Latsis sits at the head of a long table surrounded by his lieutenants. They do not discuss individual cases. There is no time. They deal in lists. A sheet of paper containing 50 names is passed around. It is called a protocol. To sign it is to sentence 50 strangers to death. The Chekists smoke cheap tobacco, the blue haze filling the room, as they sign their initials at the bottom. Latsis encourages speed. The revolution does not wait, he reminds them. The act of signing becomes a reflex. The names blur: Ivanov, Petrov, Rabinovich, Kowalski. They are not people, they are lines of text. By transforming the death warrant into a roster, Latsis dilutes the moral weight. No one pulls the trigger on 50 people at once, they just sign a document. The pen becomes the primary weapon of the Red Terror, far deadlier than the gun. Yet a dark friction emerges between Latsis's desire for scientific terror and the raw, chaotic sadism of the men on the ground. The escalation spirals out of control. In the provinces around Kiev, local Cheka bosses, untethered from direct oversight, turn their districts into personal fiefdoms of torture. They do not use the anketa. They use the whip, the branding iron, the glove. Reports reach Latsis of unspeakable atrocities. Victims rolled in spiked barrels, men buried alive, human gloves flayed from hands. Latsis reads these reports with a frown, not of moral revulsion, but of administrative annoyance. He views this amateurism as inefficient. It wastes time. It incites unnecessary rebellion. He issues circulars demanding discipline, demanding that the terror be systematic and purposeful. But he has opened Pandora's box. By declaring that the bourgeoisie has no right to exist, he has unleashed the darkest impulses of the mob. He cannot turn the anger of the people on and off like a faucet. The mechanism he built to process class enemies is being hijacked by sadists who enjoy the process for its own sake. The language of the Czech evolves into a grotesque dialect under his watch. The executioners are referred to as performers. The revolver is a tool. The basement is the staff room. This sanitization of language is crucial for the psychological survival of the perpetrators. Latsis understands that to maintain the tempo of the killing, he must protect the killers from their own humanity. He organizes extra rations for the executioners: alcohol, meat, sugar. He treats them as essential workers performing a hazardous duty. He creates a closed loop of complicity where the only morality is loyalty to the organization. The Chekist who executes a class enemy is a hero. The one who hesitates is a traitor. This binary world leaves no room for doubt. The escalation is self-perpetuating. The more they kill, the more enemies they create among the grieving families. The more enemies, the more they must kill. In the spring of 1919, the mechanism faces a crisis of capacity. The prisons are overflowing. The typhus epidemic is raging through the overcrowded cells. Latsis responds, not with mercy, but with acceleration. He orders the unloading of the prisons. This is another euphemism for mass liquidation. The lists get longer. The meetings of the collegium get shorter. The trucks run all night. Latsis works 18 hours a day, his face growing gaunt, his eyes behind the spectacles burning with a fanatical exhaustion. He is consumed by the logic of the purge. He believes he is racing against time, that if he does not eliminate the hydra of counter-revolution now, it will devour the Soviet state. He is a man trapped in a burning room of his own making, believing that the only way to put out the fire is to burn everything combustible. The division of responsibility reaches its zenith in the hostage system. Latsis orders the arrest of family members of White Army officers, of striking workers, of peasants resisting grain requisition. These people are not accused of any crime. They are collateral. They are human shields held in the damp cellars, their lives tethered to events miles away on the front lines. If the Reds retreat, the hostages are shot. If a bridge is blown up, the hostages are shot. Latsis formalizes this into a decree. He turns human life into a currency of war. A wife is exchangeable for a husband's loyalty. A child is surety for a father's obedience. It is the ultimate objectification of the individual. In the ledger of Martin Latsis, a human being is merely an asset or a liability, to be liquidated as the market forces of the Civil War dictate. As the White Army of General Denikin pushes closer to Kiev in late summer, the mechanism goes into overdrive. The evacuation of the Cheka is not a retreat, it is a slaughter. Latsis knows that he cannot leave potential enemies behind to be liberated. The order is given to clean the rear. The typewriters stop clattering, and the revolvers take over completely. The division of labor collapses into a frantic orgy of violence. The clerks, the drivers, the cooks, everyone is handed a weapon. The meticulous files, the anketas, the protocols are hurriedly packed or burned, the smoke of the bonfires mixing with the smoke of the execution grounds. Latsis oversees the destruction of the archive and the destruction of the witnesses with the same impassive expression. He is dismantling the machine he built, but he ensures that its final product is delivered. The paradox of this escalation is that while Latsis writes about the glorious future, he is wading through a present that is indistinguishable from hell. He has created a bureaucracy of death that functions without hate, without passion, and without mercy. It is a sterile steel trap that catches anyone who does not fit the template of the new man. The meetings, the documents, the euphemisms, they were all designed to hide the blood, but now, as the front collapses, the blood is rising through the floorboards. Latsis boards the train north, leaving behind a city traumatized for a generation, a city where the soil of the orchards is spongy with the dead. He has proven his theory that terror can be organized, administered, and scaled like an industrial enterprise. He carries his briefcase, heavy with the reports of expenditures, ready to present his accounts to Moscow. The mechanism works. The return to Moscow in late 1919 is not a homecoming. It is a strategic repositioning on a chessboard that has grown infinitely more complex. Martin Latsis steps off the train onto the platform of the Yaroslavsky station, the steam hissing around his boots like the dying breath of the Ukrainian front he has left behind. The city is different now. The frantic, improvised panic of 1918 has hardened into a grim, gray endurance. The Civil War is not over, but the tide is turning, and with the shifting military fortunes comes a dangerous shift in the political wind. Whispers are circulating in the corridors of the Kremlin, whispers that the Cheka has become too powerful, a state within a state, a rabid dog that needs to be leashed. Latsis, carrying the invisible weight of the thousands of expenditures in Kiev, walks into this atmosphere of intrigue not as a penitent, but as a gladiator. He knows that the most dangerous enemies are no longer the white generals with their gold epaulets, but the soft-handed Bolsheviks in the people's commissariats who speak of socialist legality and revolutionary moderation. He returns to his office at the Lubyanka, a fortress that has swallowed the chaotic energy of the early revolution and digested it into a cold, stone silence. Here, the bureaucracy of terror has matured. The piles of paper are taller, the filing cabinets more numerous. Latsis is appointed to the Collegium of the Secret Police, continuing his work as the high priest of the purge. But he finds himself fighting a war on a new front, the battle for the narrative. The Central Committee is debating the future of the Cheka. Some argue that with the White Armies retreating, the terror should be wound down. Latsis views this as suicidal naivety. He sits at his desk, surrounded by reports of peasant uprisings and factory strikes, and sees clearly that the end of the war will not bring peace but a more insidious struggle against the internal emigre, the minds that refuse to submit. It is during a heated session of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee that the challenge is thrown. A critic from the Menshevik faction, still tolerated in these waning days of political plurality, dares to quote Latsis's own words against him. He holds up a crumpled copy of the journal The Red Terror, specifically the issue from November 1918. He reads aloud the infamous lines about disregarding evidence and looking only at class origin. "Is this Marxism?" the critic demands, his voice trembling with a mixture of courage and fear. "Or is this the code of a butcher?" The room goes silent. Lenin is present, his head bowed over his notes, scribbling furiously. Dzerzhinsky sits like a statue carved from granite, his eyes unblinking. All eyes turn to Latsis. The air in the hall is thick with the smoke of cheap Mahorka tobacco and the smell of damp wool coats. But for Latsis, the sensory details of the present moment abruptly dissolve. The accusation acts as a key, unlocking a door in his memory that he rarely opens, pulling him back to the genesis of his terrible logic. In a heartbeat, the committee hall dissolves, and his mind is pulled violently back to that specific night. He is mentally transported back to his office at number 2 Gorokovaya, where the radiator is hissing, leaking a thin stream of steam that smells of rust, leaving the room freezing. Latsis sits alone, the city of Petrograd sleeping under a shroud of terror outside his window. A single lamp casts a yellow circle on the blank sheet of paper before him. He is exhausted, his eyes gritty from 48 hours without sleep, but his mind is vibrating with a cold crystal clarity. He dips his pen into the inkwell. He needs to write an editorial that will serve as a guiding star for the illiterate boys holding the rifles. He needs to simplify the complex dialectic of Marx into a trigger-pulling algorithm. He writes, "We are not waging war against individual persons." He pauses, the nib hovering. He knows that traditional law demands individual guilt. He knows that what he is about to write will sever the tether to 2,000 years of jurisprudence. He watches his own hand as if it belongs to another man. It moves. We are exterminating the bourgeoisie as a class. The ink glistens, wet and black like fresh blood. He does not cross it out. He feels a surge of dark power, the power of a man who has decided to play God. He finishes the paragraph, signs his name, and blots the page. The silence in the room is total, save for the scratching of the pen, the sound of the seal breaking on the apocalypse. Latsis blinks, the yellow lamp of 1918 replaced by the harsh daylight of the 1920 committee hall. He stands up, his face a mask of professorial calm. He does not apologize. He does not retract. He adjusts his spectacles and speaks with a voice that is terrifyingly reasonable. "The accusation," he says, "is a luxury of peacetime. We are digging the foundation of a new world in a pit of sewage. Do not blame the shovel for the smell." He argues that the terror was not an excess, but a surgical necessity. He defends the clumsiness of his phrasing as a necessary simplification for the time, but he never disavows the core principle that the survival of the collective justifies the annihilation of the specific. Lenin eventually intervenes, rebuking the political phrasing but defending the Cheka's devotion. Latsis survives the challenge. The moment of danger passes, but it marks a critical branching point. The regime had a choice: to step back from the abyss of lawlessness or to institutionalize it. By protecting Latsis, by keeping the architect of the class warrant in power, they choose the abyss. This victory emboldens the Chekist psychology. The organization realizes it is untouchable. Latsis, now secure, turns his attention to the refinement of the administrative exile. If they cannot shoot everyone, they must remove them. He begins to map out the vast empty spaces of the Russian map, the Solovetsky Islands, the frozen taiga of the north. He envisions a network of camps not just as prisons, but as re-education zones where labor will scrub the bourgeois taint from the soul. This is the embryo of the Gulag. Latsis discusses the logistics of transporting thousands of prisoners by rail with the Commissariat of Transport. He calculates the calories needed to keep a man working in sub-zero temperatures versus the cost of replacing him. It is the same meat grinder logic from Kiev, but now applied to a slow, grinding death rather than a quick bullet. The bureaucracy of the Cheka begins to mimic the structure of a legitimate government, a dark mirror image of the state. It has its own publishing house, its own sanatoriums for stressed executioners, its own culture. Latsis is instrumental in creating this insular world. He writes classified manuals on surveillance techniques, detailing how to recruit informants, how to open mail without leaving a trace, how to break a suspect's will without breaking his bones, though the latter is still an option. He emphasizes the inner agent, the spy placed within a factory or a regiment. He wants the Cheka to be the all-seeing eye. Under his guidance, the paranoia that was once a reaction to danger becomes a permanent operational mode. The conspiracy is no longer an event to be discovered. It is an assumption to be proven. There is a moment in the winter of 1920 where the human cost of this system brushes against Latsis's personal sphere, testing the armor of his detachment. A distant acquaintance from his days in the Latvian underground, a man named Peters, not the Cheka deputy, but a minor poet, is arrested for anti-Soviet agitation. He had complained about rations in a private letter. The file lands on Latsis's desk. It is a test of his own algorithm. The man is a friend in the conventional sense, a comrade from the days of struggle. But the enquete is clear. The letter is damning. Latsis looks at the signature. He remembers sharing bread with this man in exile. A flicker of hesitation, a ghost of the boy Janis Sudrabs, passes through the room. But Martin Latsis, the deputy, crushes it. If he makes an exception, the logic fails. If the logic fails, the terror was murder. He cannot allow it to be murder. It must be necessity. He writes Raskut on the file. He sends his friend to the wall to save his own ideological consistency. This is the point of no return. He has sacrificed the last scrap of his personal humanity on the altar of the system. The critical branching point concludes not with a battle, but with a transition. By 1921, the Civil War winds down. The peasant rebellions in Tambov and the sailors' revolt in Kronstadt are crushed with ruthless efficiency, operations in which the Cheka plays a pivotal role. The question of the Cheka's future is answered. It will not be disbanded. It will be rebranded. It becomes the GPU, State Political Directorate, in 1922. Latsis helps oversee this transition. The leather coats are exchanged for uniforms with insignia. The chaotic basements are replaced by formal interrogation blocks. The Red Terror as a chaotic wave ends, but the police state begins. Latsis has succeeded in weaving the secret police into the very DNA of the Soviet Union. It is no longer an emergency measure. It is the skeleton upon which the flesh of the state hangs. As he packs his papers to move to a new office in the economic administration, a shift in his career that will take him away from the direct machinery of death, Latsis looks out over Moscow. The city is quiet, beaten into submission. The church bells are silent, many melted down for scrap. The streets are orderly. He believes he has won. He believes that by hardening his heart, he has saved the revolution. But he does not see the invisible thread that connects the death warrant he wrote in 1918 to the darkness that is gathering on the horizon of the 1930s. He has created a machine that feeds on enemies, and when it runs out of bourgeois enemies, it will turn its appetite inward. He steps out of the Lubyanka, the heavy wooden door closing behind him with a sound like a coffin lid, unaware that he has just locked himself inside the very trap he designed. The branching point is past. The path to the Great Terror is now a straight line. The decade that follows the Civil War is a period of deceptive, suffocating normalcy. For Martin Latsis, a time when the blood on his hands is scrubbed away by the ink of administrative respectability. He trades the leather coat of the Chekist for the wool suit of the academic and the bureaucrat. The man who once signed death warrants by the stack now signs diplomas and economic reports. He ascends to the directorship of the Plekhanov Institute of National Economy, lecturing bright young students on the inevitable triumph of socialism. He writes books, histories of the Cheka, memoirs of the underground days, in which he sanitizes the terror, presenting it as a heroic, sterile necessity of the past. He walks the streets of Moscow, a city now paving over its scars with the monumental architecture of Stalinism, and he believes he is safe. He believes that the Red Terror was a closed chapter, a specific tool for a specific time, and that he, the master craftsman, has been retired with honors. He is fatally wrong. He has not retired the machine. He has merely handed the keys to a new operator, one who has no loyalty to the old Bolsheviks and whose appetite for expenditures makes the Cheka of 1918 look like a parish council. The atmosphere in Moscow shifts imperceptibly at first, then with the violent suddenness of a thundercrack. It is December 1934. Sergei Kirov is murdered in Leningrad. The pistol shot that kills him echoes the shot that struck Lenin in 1918, but the reaction is different. This time, the terror is not directed outward at the bourgeoisie. It turns inward, like a wolf chewing off its own leg. Joseph Stalin, the man in the Kremlin, begins to pull the loose threads of the party, and the fabric of the old Revolutionary Guard begins to unravel. Latsis watches from his office as his peers, the men who stormed the Winter Palace, the men who built the Soviet state, begin to disappear. They vanish from their desks, their names are chiseled off plaques, their faces airbrushed from photographs. At first, Latsis rationalizes this. He is a creature of the system, and his reflex is to trust the logic of the purge. There must be traitors, he tells himself. The party is never wrong. He clings to the belief that because he was the architect of the guillotine, his neck is exempt from the blade. But the logic Latsis invented, the logic of objective guilt, is mutable. In 1918, the enemy was defined by class. In 1937, the enemy is defined by paranoia. The Latvian operation begins. The NKVD, the bloated, monstrous grandchild of Latsis's Cheka, receives order number 49,990. It targets nationalist spies. Being Latvian, once a badge of elite revolutionary fervor, is now evidence of treason. The network of Latvian riflemen, the Praetorian Guard of October, is systematically liquidated. Latsis sees his circle shrinking. Friends stop calling. When he walks into the canteen at the Institute, conversations die. He feels the crosshairs settling on his back, not because of anything he has done, but because of who he is. The inspection of hands has returned, but this time they are not checking for calluses. They are checking for a Latvian surname. The irony is absolute. The man who erased the individual in favor of the category is now being erased because of his category. The knock on the door comes on November 29th, 1937. It is not a dramatic raid with smashed windows. It is a polite, terrifying intrusion. Men in blue caps, the new generation of Chekists, enter his apartment. They are young, efficient, and utterly indifferent to his history. Latsis tries to speak, to invoke his rank, his service, his intimacy with Dzerzhinsky. "I am Martin Latsis," he says, as if the name is a shield. The officer in charge merely checks a list identical in function to the ones Latsis drafted in Kiev, and nods. "We know who you are, citizen. Get your coat." They search his study. They pull his books from the shelves, the very books where he justified the terror. They sweep his papers into a sack. The apartment, the sanctuary of his respectable years, is violated with the same casual bureaucratic thoroughness he once taught his subordinates. He is led down the stairs past the averted eyes of neighbors and shoved into the back of a black Gaze M1, the Black Maria. The ride to the Lubyanka is short. He is returning to the building he helped make legendary, not as a master, but as meat. Inside the prison, the degradation is swift. He is stripped of his suit, his glasses, his dignity. He is thrown into a cell that smells of unwashed bodies and despair, the same smell he once claimed was the scent of progress. The interrogation begins. It is a grotesque parody of his own methods. The interrogator does not ask him about facts. He does not ask for evidence. He presents a pre-written narrative. Latsis is a member of a fascist nationalist Latvian organization. He has been spying for Germany. He has been sabotaging the economy. It is absurd. It is a lie so massive it defies comprehension. Latsis tries to argue using reason. "I founded this service," he shouts. "I gave you the tools you are using." The interrogator smiles, a cold, dead smile that mirrors the one Latsis wore in 1918. "Then you know," the man says, "that the confession is the queen of evidence." The physical torture that follows is the inevitable conclusion of Latsis's philosophy. When he authorized the pressure on bourgeois prisoners in 1919, he opened the door to the room where he now finds himself. He is beaten with rubber truncheons. He is kept awake for days, standing until his legs swell and burst. The conveyor method, continuous interrogation by shifting teams of officers, breaks his mind. He is 50 years old, his body soft from years of desk work. He cannot withstand the violence he once unleashed. But the true torture is psychological. He is forced to see the monster he created without the mask of ideology. There is no class struggle here. There is only a quota. The NKVD has a plan to arrest 20,000 Latvians. Latsis is just a unit to fulfill that plan. He is being devoured by the mathematics of mass murder. He realizes, in the delirium of pain, that he is not a martyr. He is a statistic. He breaks. He signs the confession. He admits to crimes he did not commit, implicating friends who are already dead or soon to be. He signs his name, Martin Latsis, on the bottom of the protocol. It is the last document he will ever sign. The paperwork is processed with lightning speed. There is no trial. Not really. On February 11, 1938, he is brought before the military collegium of the Supreme Court. The hearing lasts 20 minutes. He stands in a small room facing 3 judges who look bored. They read the charges. He mumbles a confirmation. They read the sentence. The highest measure of social protection, shooting. The phrase is his own. He coined it to make execution sound like a public service. Now, it rings in his ears like a curse. There is no appeal. The sentence is final. The final set piece, the catastrophe of his existence, plays out hours later. It is night. The snow is falling heavily over the Moscow suburbs. Latsis is loaded into the back of a truck with 20 other condemned men. They are driven out of the city towards the Kaluga highway to a special zone known as Komunarka. This was once the dacha of Genrik Yagoda, the former head of the NKVD who was himself purged and shot. Now it is a slaughterhouse. The truck bounces over the frozen ruts. Latsis sits in the darkness, shivering in his torn clothes. The engine roars, a deafening mechanical howl that drowns out the prayers and sobs of the other prisoners. It is the same sound he ordered in Kiev to mask the executions in the garden. The echo is perfect. The universe is closing the circle. The truck stops in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. The headlights cut through the swirling snow, illuminating a trench that has been dug by a bulldozer. The prisoners are ordered out. The air is biting cold, freezing the breath in their lungs. Latsis stumbles. He has lost his glasses. The world is a blur of gray and black. He sees the executioners, men in heavy sheepskin coats smoking cigarettes, chatting about the cold. They are the new generation, the performers. He trained in spirit, if not in person. They are efficient. They do not hate him. They do not know him. He is just work. He is led to the edge of the pit. He looks down. It is already filled with bodies, a tangled mass of limbs and torsos dusted with lime and snow. He sees the bourgeoisie, the traitors, the wreckers, all mixed together in a final classless democracy of death. He realizes that this is the only equality his revolution ever achieved, the equality of the grave. The command is given. Not a speech, not a proclamation, just a grunt. Kneel. Latsis sinks to his knees in the frozen mud. He feels the cold metal of the barrel against the base of his skull. In that final fraction of a second before the hammer strikes the pin, Martin Latsis does not see the radiant future of communism. He sees the face of the professor in Petrograd, whose hands he inspected. He sees the smooth palms and the rough palms, all rotting together in the earth. He realizes that the machine has no master, only fuel. He is fuel. The crack of the pistol is swallowed by the forest. Martin Latsis falls forward into the pit, his body adding one more inch to the depth of the tragedy he engineered. The executioner kicks a clod of dirt over him and turns to the next man. The truck engine continues to idle, pumping exhaust into the pristine winter air. The system works perfectly. The architect has been consumed by the architecture. The silence of the forest returns heavy and indifferent, covering the crime with a fresh layer of snow, hiding the dead just as Latsis had taught them to do. The books he wrote sit on library shelves in Moscow, extolling the justice of the Cheka, while his corpse freezes in an anonymous ditch, a class enemy liquidated by the logic of his own pen. The dawn that rises over Moscow on February 12, 1938, is pale and indifferent. The city wakes up, boils water for tea, and trudges to the tram stops, unaware that one of the architects of its nightmare is now a frozen lump of matter in a mass grave at Komunarka. The immediate aftermath of Martin Latsis's execution is not a shockwave, but a void. There is no announcement in Pravda. There is no public trial to dissect his crimes for the masses. He was processed in secret, a disposal rather than a spectacle. The machinery he built does not pause to mourn its creator. In fact, it accelerates. The death of Latsis and his generation of old Bolsheviks removes the last psychological barrier to the total state. There is no longer anyone left who remembers the original ideals, however twisted they were. There are only the functionaries, the men who know that the only way to survive is to be the hammer, never the nail. The erasure of Martin Latsis from the Soviet consciousness begins before his body is even cold. It is a damnatio memoriae, enacted with industrial efficiency. In the libraries of the Soviet Union, orders are dispatched from Glavlit, the censorship agency Latsis himself once helped organize. Librarians Women in gray shawls, fearful for their own safety, take down the histories of the Civil War. They find the pages where Latsis is mentioned, where his picture appears standing next to Dzerzhinsky. They do not burn the books. That would be waste. They use razor blades. They slice out the offending images. In some cases, they are instructed to cover his face with thick black India ink. Across the vast empire, thousands of photographs are defaced. The hero of the Cheka becomes a black void, a piece of unhistory. Students at the Plekhanov Institute, where he lectured just months before, open their textbooks to find a gap in the narrative. They learn quickly not to ask why. To ask where his comrade Latsis is to volunteer to join him. This silence is the true legacy of the Red Terror, a silence that Latsis theorized, but perhaps never fully anticipated. The society that emerges in the wake of the Great Purge is one of total atomization. Latsis had destroyed the class enemy, but the system has now destroyed the concept of trust entirely. In the communal apartments of Moscow, 7 families share a kitchen, but they share nothing else. They speak in whispers. They watch the hallway telephone with dread. Latsis's dream of a collective society has birthed a nation of isolated, terrified individuals. The inspection of hands has evolved into an inspection of souls. Every citizen carries a mental anketa, constantly evaluating their neighbors, their children, their spouses for signs of deviation. The suitcase becomes a ubiquitous object in the Soviet home, a small bag packed with warm underwear, soap, and hard tack, kept by the door in case the car comes at night. Latsis wanted to engineer a new human. He succeeded in engineering Homo Sovieticus, a creature defined by the ability to wait for the knock. The terror, having consumed its creators, settles into a grim bureaucratic normalcy under the leadership of Lavrentiy Beria. It loses the fiery revolutionary rhetoric of Latsis's day and becomes cold, administrative, and banal. The executions continue, but they are no longer justified by class warfare editorials. They are justified by quotas. The meat grinder Latsis ran in Kiev was a prototype. The Gulag system that expands in the late 1930s is the mass production model. Millions are sent to the camps not to be exterminated immediately, but to be used as raw material for the industrialization of the state. Latsis's theory of expenditure reaches its logical zenith. The human being is reduced strictly to their caloric output versus their labor input. If a prisoner cuts timber in Kolyma for 3 months before dying of scurvy, the state has extracted its value. This is the science Latsis championed, stripped of its poetic veneer and applied with the unfeeling precision of a strip mining operation. Internationally, the disappearance of men like Latsis creates a fog of confusion that the regime exploits with masterful cynicism. The West watches the purges with a mixture of horror and willful blindness. Intellectuals in Paris and London, desperate to believe in the Soviet experiment, rationalize the disappearances. They accept the official lie that Latsis and his ilk were spies and fascist agents. It is a testament to the power of the narrative Latsis helped build. The idea that the party is infallible is so seductive that even those outside its reach want to believe it. The paradox is biting. The Western press, which Latsis despised as bourgeois, largely fails to investigate his fate. He is swallowed by the secrecy he helped enshrine. The Iron Curtain is not just a barrier of borders, it is a barrier of information, and Latsis laid the first bricks. Then comes the war, June 1941. The German Wehrmacht smashes across the border, rolling over the same lands Latsis terrorized in 1919. The Soviet Union is caught unprepared. Its officer corps decimated by the very purges that claimed Latsis. The irony is catastrophic. The Red Army is leaderless because the regime killed its own commanders in the name of security. But as the panic sets in, the ghost of Martin Latsis returns to the front lines. The NKVD forms blocking detachments, Zagriado Triadi. These are units stationed behind the regular troops with machine guns, under orders to shoot anyone who retreats. It is the resurrection of Latsis's hostage philosophy. Terrorize your own men more than the enemy terrorizes them. The methods of the Civil War, summary execution, collective responsibility, the disregard for individual life, are dusted off and applied on a continental scale. The victory of 1945 is won with oceans of blood, a significant portion of it spilled by the internal security forces, ensuring loyalty at gunpoint. Latsis is dead, but his textbook is the operational manual for the war effort. The post-war years see the apotheosis of the system. Stalin is a god, and the security apparatus is his lightning bolt. The fear is so deeply internalized that it no longer requires mass arrests to function. The memory of the terror is enough. Latsis lies in the anonymous earth of Kommunarka, the soil settling over his bones, while the survivors of his generation rot in the camps of the Arctic Circle. There is a profound aching injustice in the silence. The victims of Latsis, the families in Kiev, the hostages in Petrograd, are dead. The perpetrator, Latsis, is dead, killed by his own machine. There is no one left to answer for the crimes. The ledger is closed, but it is not balanced. The state claims to represent the will of the people, yet it is built on a foundation of unacknowledged corpses. The legitimacy of the Soviet government is maintained by a vast collective amnesia. To remember the truth of 1918 or 1937 is to be an enemy of the state. This period of the immediate aftermath stretches until 1953, a 15-year winter of the soul, where the only truth is the lie. The image of the Chekist is polished into a diamond-hard myth in cinema and literature. They are portrayed as vigilant guardians, knights of the revolution, sleeplessly protecting the motherland. The reality, the basement slaughters, the glove trick, the quotas, is buried under layers of concrete propaganda. Latsis is not mentioned in these myths. He is an inconvenient ghost. He was a Chekist, yes, but he was also a traitor. He occupies a limbo in the Soviet pantheon, a man who cannot be celebrated because he was purged, but cannot be fully demonized because he helped build the shrine. He is simply absent, a hole in the tapestry. It is only with the death of Stalin in March 1953 that the ice begins to crack. The system spasms. Beria is arrested and shot. The executioner executed once again, the cycle repeating one last time. Slowly, hesitantly, the survivors begin to return from the camps. They are ghosts walking into a world that has forgotten them. They bring with them the stories of the Gulag, the stories that were whispered in the barracks, and families of the purged begin to petition the government. Where is my husband? What happened to my father? The answers are slow to come. The state is terrified of its own past. To admit that Latsis was innocent of being a spy is to admit that the party murdered its own loyal servant. But to admit that Latsis was a mass murderer is to delegitimize the Cheka itself. The Soviet leadership under Khrushchev faces a paradox. How to rehabilitate the victims of the purge without condemning the system that purged them? The solution they find is as cold and bureaucratic as anything Latsis ever devised. They invent the concept of juridical rehabilitation. It is a legal maneuver, not a moral one. In 1956, a military court reviews the case of Martin Latsis. They look at the files, they see the lack of evidence, the forced confession. They issue a ruling. The sentence of 1938 is vacated for lack of corpus delicti. There is no apology. There is no acknowledgement of the blood on Latsis's own hands. He is declared rehabilitated. His name is restored to the encyclopedias. He is once again a hero of the Civil War. This is the final, ultimate absurdity. The state forgives him for being a victim, but it celebrates him for being an executioner. The man who denied justice to thousands is granted a posthumous pardon by the same system, completing the circle of hypocrisy. But the rehabilitation is a piece of paper. It does not dig him up from Communarca. It does not reattach the severed heads of the Kiev bourgeoisie. It does not heal the trauma of a nation. The long-term aftermath begins here, in the gray stagnation of the Brezhnev era. Latsis becomes a safe, sterile figure in the history books. A street is named after him in Soviet Latvia. A plaque is put up. He is flattened into a two-dimensional icon of revolutionary vigilance. But beneath the surface, the rot remains. The fear that Latsis engineered has mutated into cynicism. The Soviet people no longer believe in the radiant future. They pretend to work, and the state pretends to pay them. They pretend to vote, and the state pretends to count. The doublethink that Orwell wrote about, and that Latsis lived, becomes the default setting of the human mind in the USSR. The silence of the post-Stalin era is different from the terror of the 1930s. It is a heavy, exhausted silence. The archives are sealed. The shooting grounds at Communarca are fenced off and designated as a special object of the KGB, a restricted zone where mushrooms grow tall in the calcium-rich soil. No one goes there. No one lays flowers. The geography of the terror is erased from the maps. The dacha where Latsis was shot remains a secret. The system relies on this invisibility. If the people saw the bones, they might ask questions. So the bones are hidden, and Latsis, the man who believed in the transparency of class warfare, becomes a permanent secret. In Latvia, his homeland, the legacy is even more fractured. To the Soviets, he is a rehabilitated hero. To the Latvians, who remember the independent republic he tried to destroy, he is a traitor and a butcher, a man who turned against his own people to serve a Russian empire painted red. He is a man without a country, claimed by an ideology that killed him and rejected by the nation that gave him birth. The Latvian riflemen are celebrated in Soviet monuments, but the reality of their role as the Praetorian Guard of the Terror is a source of deep, unspoken national shame. Latsis is the embodiment of this wound. As the decades roll on, the Soviet Union lumbers towards its own collapse, carrying the dead weight of its history like a cancer in the gut. The generation that knew Latsis dies out. The witnesses pass away, but the institutions he built, the KGB, the system of internal passports, the culture of surveillance, remain the pillars of the state until the very end. Martin Latsis wrote the source code for a totalitarian machine that outlived him by 50 years. He proved that you can kill the soul of a nation and keep the body walking. His tragedy is not that he died. His tragedy is that his work succeeded so brilliantly that it rendered his own life and the lives of millions of others completely meaningless. The machine did not need him. It only needed the blood he taught it to drink. The silence of the grave at Communarca is finally broken, not by a decree, but by the rusting gears of the Soviet state grinding to a halt. It is the early 1990s. The Berlin Wall has fallen, and the red flag over the Kremlin has been lowered for the last time. In the chaos of the new Russia, the KGB's iron grip on its secrets begins to slip. A group of researchers, children of the purged, gain access to the restricted zones that dot the map of the Moscow region like cigarette burns. They push open the rotting wooden gates of the special object where Martin Latsis lies. What they find is a forest that defies nature. The ground is uneven, sunken in rectangular depressions, where the earth has settled over the decades. It is a landscape of mass murder preserved in amber. The trees grow tall and thick, fed by the calcium of thousands of skeletons. Here, the final terrible irony of Latsis's life is laid bare for the first time. He is not buried in a hero's tomb. He's not buried alone. He is inextricably mixed with the very bourgeoisie he swore to exterminate. The bones of the Chekist and the bones of the white officer, the fanatic and the priest, are entangled in the same root systems. In death, the class struggle has been resolved into a grim, absolute unity. The opening of the archives in the Yeltsin era brings Latsis back into the light, but it is a harsh, unforgiving glare. Historians pull the files that were sealed in 1938. They read the protocols signed by Latsis in Kiev. They read the interrogation logs of Latsis in the Lubyanka. The picture that emerges is stripped of the romantic varnish of the revolutionary hero. He is revealed as a man who intellectualized butchery. The documents show a terrifying lack of hesitation. There are no tear-stained letters of regret, no diaries wrestling with conscience. There are only orders. The modern reader is struck by the banality of his evil. He sounds less like a monster and more like a mid-level manager dealing with a pest control problem. This revelation destroys the last vestiges of his reputation. In independent Latvia, he is not celebrated as a native son, but reviled as a collaborator who exported death. His name is scrubbed from the streets that were named after him. The plaque on his birthplace is removed. He is homeless in history, rejected by the nation he abandoned and the empire he served. Yet, a strange amnesia persists in the collective memory of the Russian state. While the archives condemn him, the machinery he helped found, the security services, undergoes a rebranding, not a dismantling. The KGB becomes the FSB. The portraits of Dzerzhinsky are taken down, then quietly put back up in private offices. Latsis is gone, but the Chekist tradition remains a badge of honor for the new elite. They celebrate the sword and shield of the state, carefully stepping over the corpses that Latsis left in the basement. The silence at Komunarka is reinstated, but now it is a silence of neglect. The mass graves are eventually marked by simple Orthodox crosses, placed by the church, not the state. There is no grand monument to the victims of the Red Terror, only the wind sighing through the pines. Latsis lies there, unmourned and unforgotten, a radioactive isotope in the soil of history that refuses to decay. The digital age brings a final spectral afterlife to Martin Latsis. His image, the oval spectacles, the receding hairline, the thin, tight lips, circulates on the internet. He becomes a meme for those who study the macabre machinery of totalitarianism. His quotes, once printed in millions of copies of Pravda, now float in the ether of cyberspace as warnings. Do not look for evidence. The sentence hangs over the 21st century like a dark constellation. It serves as a reminder that the slide into tyranny begins not with camps, but with language. It begins when a man decides that a category of people is guilty by default. Latsis has become a teacher again, but not the kind he intended to be. He is the anatomy lesson of a political plague. He teaches us that the road to hell is paved with administrative efficiency, and that the man who signs the paper is often more dangerous than the man who holds the gun. We are left finally with the residue of his soul, filtered through the sieve of a century. Martin Latsis imagined he was building a cathedral of human happiness, but he only knew how to dig the crypt. He stands as the ultimate proof of the revolutionary paradox, that you cannot love humanity while hating human beings. The abstraction of the class blinded him to the reality of the person. He severed the connection between his hand and his heart, and in doing so, he became the first victim of his own system. The terror did not start when the bullets flew. It started when Latsis looked at a trembling prisoner and saw a statistic instead of a man. That moment of dehumanization was the suicide of his own humanity. He sleeps now in the crushing embrace of the earth, surrounded by the silence of the millions who followed him into the dark. There is no redemption in his story, only a cold, geometric justice. The Department of General Affairs in the afterlife has filed him away under expendable. The ink has faded, the paper has crumbled, but the scar remains. Martin Latsis, the man who tried to rewrite the laws of God and man, is erased by the very nothingness he worshipped. The wind blows over Communarca, carrying the dust of the executioner and the executed, swirling together in a gray, indistinguishable mist. The lesson is finished. The book is closed. The only sound left is the echo of a pen scratching on paper, signing a warrant that can never be unsigned.